Hi, and welcome back to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. Okay, so we're going to talk about some pro-atheist, some pro-theist arguments that I think to be very weak. They're ones that atheists hold against us and show that how weak the theist arguments are. I'm going to go through them, show the atheist rebuttals, and then show how what I consider to be much stronger arguments to be made. The first argument, science can't explain. This is don't forget, this is the theist argument. The theist would say science can't explain the complexity and beauty of life, the order. It must have been designed by God. It's the so-called intelligent design argument. I think, to be honest, it was a bit of a compromise used to placate evolutionary biologists, because the argument is, well, evolution, yeah, we believe in evolution, but it's just that God makes evolution happen. Two problems with that. Firstly, when we talk about complexity in nature, complexity is a subjective thing. For what might be something very complicated to you, may be quite easy, straightforward to somebody else. For example, you could look at an inanimate object like a stone and look at the patterns of the colours and the shades and the bumps and say, well, that's quite a complex pattern. That must have been made by an intelligent designer, when in fact we know that it was just sort of geological phenomenon or even water. So complexity is subjective, but also this intelligent design argument is post facto. We're looking at it from after the event. Let me give you an example. If I were to say to you, look at last week's lottery results, isn't it a phenomenal coincidence that those numbers came up? Do you know there's a 13.8, there's nearly a 1 in 14 million chance of those numbers coming up? Staggering coincidence that they came up. If I were to look at a football result or results of a darts match or whatever it might be, looking at that result in hindsight, it might seem like an incredible coincidence. But actually that's because we're looking back at it, and we're not looking at all the other circumstances that may or may not have happened. By looking at nature in this way, that's what we're doing. We're looking back and saying, isn't it an incredible coincidence that the life's fallen into place this way? I think there's something to be said for the argument, but not quite in the way that it's put. Firstly, we've got to appreciate that life isn't just like a stone, that all of the individual parts of an organism, of an organ, let alone an ecosystem, interrelate with each other in such a way that makes it, there is this what's called the Goldilocks effect. It's not one extreme, it's not another extreme, it's just right. A cute example is the colour of chlorophyll, which is the chemical in plants that helps them to absorb light and convert it into oxygen and make energy for themselves. Chlorophyll is green, and it's what gives plants the green colour. But if it was a colour at either end of the colour spectrum, if it was another colour of the rainbow, if it was red or if it was blue, it would absorb too much light or it would absorb not enough light. If it would absorb too much light, the plant would just burn up because it would absorb too much heat. And if it didn't absorb enough light, it wouldn't be functional at all. So it's bang in the middle, nice easy colour to absorb the right amount of light. Can science explain the complexity and order in nature? To some extent it can, and every day goes by, more research is done to uncover some of these, the beauty and the complexity of it. But my question would be, who made these rules? Who made this complexity? Who started it all off? Who kick-started the Big Bang? Who started life on Earth? To this day, nobody's been able to provide a theory to explain the start of life on this planet that holds together. Stanley's experiments, firstly, A, have not been replicated, and B, the experiments he did do produced life in proteins in a test tube, but they rapidly decomposed. So if you listen to some of the theories out there about how life started, they're pretty far out. Judaism, I should point out, believes that God not only created nature, but He sustains it every day. As we say in our prayers, every day God sustains, recreates nature. Every moment God recreates nature. The next rubbish pro-theist argument is that God's existence is proven by Scripture, that the fact that we have a Torah and a Bible, it proves God in itself. Well, it's a self-referential argument because, yes, if someone's written a book that says God exists, well, yeah, it's going to show that God exists. But there are inconsistencies in the Torah and the Bible. There are grammatical mistakes or anomalies, as you might say, and there are certainly a variety of religions that have interpreted the Bible in different ways in the Torah. Even though Islam and Christianity claim to be offshoots of Judaism and base themselves on the Abrahamic tradition, nonetheless, they have interpreted the Torah very differently. So I'm not happy with that argument, but the argument I would give is how would you explain incidents in the Bible like mass revelation? The Bible talks about, the Torah talks about the 10 plagues in Egypt, the Exodus, the splitting of the sea, the revelation, the interaction between God and the Jewish people at Sinai. These sort of things, mass revelation as opposed to revelation to individuals, which, by the way, Judaism doesn't place much significance on. In fact, if you look in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about how prophets are to be treated with much skepticism. Mass revelation in Judaism plays a very key part, and we have festivals that celebrate the mass revelation. Much more difficult to disprove, much more difficult to fabricate. And yes, as a result of that, much of Western civilization is based on the Judeo-Christian values as laid out in the Bible, in the Torah. Next argument. Some unexplained evidence that we see in our day-to-day lives are miraculous, and these miracles prove the existence of God. Really? Yeah, is it a miracle or is it coincidence? Difficult to distinguish between the two, and quite often, yes, yes, okay, you might say, well, how many coincidences need to happen before it becomes something that you see as being a life-changing event? But, you know, in Judaism we believe, why would God want to do miracles? It's just there'll always be doubters, so why bother? The real question I would ask is, what fundamental force is underpinning nature to make sure it follows these rules? Next argument. We can have morality, we don't need God. Someone could have gone off into a cave, written a book of morality, and we'd all be following it. Don't need religion. Good point. But it's not a proof, really. It doesn't prove anything. So what if they did? If it works, what the heck? Do we see morality in nature? So we do see altruism in nature, but it's normally there's normally a genetic predisposition. Richard Dawkins talks about this, that the survival of the fittest means that genes, that the organisms have their behaviour dictated to them, so that they perpetuate the survival of their species, and they perpetuate their genes. And so their behaviour, their reproductive behaviour, their survival behaviour is geared up towards that. So when you do see social animals interacting together, that's them getting together to help perpetuate more animals. But yet morality goes a step beyond that and talks about altruism out of selfless motives. And we do see that in human behaviour, kindness to strangers. In Judaism, we talk about there's a law where we're not allowed to curse the deaf. In situations where there are no consequences, how would people behave? Are you allowed to curse someone who can't hear you? Are you allowed someone to curse someone who's beyond earshot? Well, Judaism says no, because that will have a detrimental effect on you and detract from your relationship with your Maker. But how do atheists justify morality and fairness? Is there such a thing as absolute morality that we all follow? We all know things are right or wrong, it's just that we have some sort of internal justification mechanism for it. How do we act when as I say, there's no when the behaviour has no consequences and there's no loss of time or money to either party? The example I like to give is of incest. Most of us would acknowledge that incest, sleeping with a close relative, is absolutely wrong. There's no consequences. There are potentially no consequences to it. Nobody gets hurt. They can both be consensuous, but consensual, I should say. But we know it's wrong. The theist would say, well, that's because the Torah tells us that it's wrong. We have a text, we have a law against it. But the atheist would say, well, it's because it would lead to inbreeding and genetic abnormalities. That's why we do it. It's wrong. We don't need a religion to explain it away. But the theist would counter that and say, well, animals do practice incest, and we have had many cultures throughout history that practice incest. In fact, there's probably some around today that do it as well. Next rubbish theist argument. Theism wouldn't be so widespread if God didn't exist. If it's popular, it must be true. Yeah. How do you explain Justin Bieber? Just because he's popular doesn't mean his music's any good. What I would say is, though, how do you explain the survival of the Jewish people? How do you explain that a religion based on an absolute minority has outlived some of the most aggressive empires throughout history? The final argument is called Pascal's wager, and it goes along the lines of, well, it's safer to believe in God than to be wrong and go to hell. In other words, there's no evidence that God doesn't exist, so let's believe in God. It's cute, but it's not really strong enough, is it, as a way of defining your life's purpose and defining your life's theology. We'd get nothing done if we just followed contingencies and we just did what was the least unsafe. My real question would be, does religion make sense to you? Does it give you meaning? Does it help you through times of trouble and times of joy? Many people find that it does, and find that there is a psychological benefit to it. And I'd like to say that if anything gives you that, and it doesn't harm or hurt other people, and it brings you closer to a more meaningful life, then there's got to be something in that. I hope you found these beneficial, and look forward to more videos to come. Bye now, and thanks for watching.